Hi there, it's Carl Irwin with a quick look at options in Linux for music creation. There's actually many options, but the question came up regarding DAW, digital audio workstation, digital audio workstations that are available in Linux, and which ones are better to use. And I think the answer to that is it depends on what you're doing. Some are more suitable than others for particular jobs. Some are more or less adequate for a focused job, and then others might be more convoluted for a focused job, and therefore not worth the adventure to figure out. So I just want to go through this because these are the ones that I use, and there are more. There are even some proprietary ones that are out there that are available with Linux ports, or that are compatible using Windows compatibility layer technology on Linux. But I'm not going to get into those. These are for Linux. They are native Linux applications. So first I have to start with Musescore, and the reason why I bring up Musescore is because I personally write to notation. That is typically how I create music, most music. Sometimes if I'm working in electronic music, I will work from DAW to actually compose and create the music. Sometimes I will create music in DAW that's orchestral, but it's pretty rare anymore, particularly since Musescore 4 and the Muse Sounds technology has caught up to the creativity. I just don't see a lot of reason to do a lot of orchestral stuff in the DAW. And I do understand that you have more control in DAW, and I've actually made that argument with the Musescore people, that you could never really replace that unless you create a MIDI layer inside of Musescore that gives you control over the smallest aspects of the play engine, which Musescore does not have that right now. The former versions had some of that CC controller level control, but not right now. So I do understand that, but I just find that the play engine and the Muse sounds are just absolutely eating everybody else's lunch. I mean, there's a lot of denial, I think, about its quality, particularly from people that have been very much invested in Note Performer and certainly in their very expensive libraries. But I'll be quite frank with you. I haven't found anything that Musescore 4 and Muse Sounds can't do with a little bit of tweaking, which is what you would do in a DAW. I mean, that's the whole point behind entering MIDI information, is that you are precisely tweaking what you want the outcome to be. And it makes sense that if you're going to write from notation and then export from notation, you can do the same. You can change articulations and dynamics and really kind of hack around with that to get the samples called upon that you desire. So I just find that the engine is solid. It just is hyper realistic, particularly in its use of portamento transitions between notes. Again, you have control over that by changing articulations and that kind of control. Hopefully there'll be a MIDI layer that will give us even greater control over some of that, but until that time, I just don't have a reason. I just don't have a reason to go to DAW. It's more efficient, and the quality is so good to work from Musescore. So that's what I'm using a lot. And I also want to point out that Musescore has the capability to use other sounds. So you can convert your SFZ libraries, or if you have a good sound font library, you can import those sounds into Musescore 4. What you want to do is you want to isolate an instrument as its own SF2 file and then add it to the proper folder, and then you can bring them in. And then, of course, if you're working on Windows, but not Linux at this point, if you're working on Windows or Mac, you are able to use other plugins, instrument plugins. So, and that capability is developing, at least on Windows and Mac. It's not developing very much on Linux. Hopefully we'll have an LV2 layer where we can do our native Linux instrument players for our own libraries that we use. So anyway, you can do electronic music on Musescore just because of that. There's some onboard sounds, and of course you can add sound fonts as well. So there's a lot that you can get away with. And you can sample anything that you want, create an SF2 for it, and then use it directly from Musescore. I've done that quite a bit. And you have some fading control. You don't have a lot of automation right now, but you have some fading control, and you've got some reverb control, at least on the Linux platform. There'll be hopefully other plugins coming down the road. But anyway, I just have to bring that up because when it comes to music creation, when you're asking me about DAW, my answer is I do so much orchestral stuff now from Musescore. I don't have a reason to spend all that time tweaking MIDI when the Play engine and Musescore is just so solid right now. So that's that. So anyway, Musescore, I often will, if I do, I used to notate in Musescore, and then I would export my MIDI data and bring it into a DAW. And then from there, I would tweak the MIDI data. And I used to do that using sound libraries on the DAW. So, and I'll talk a little bit about that as we look at the other options. So that's enough on Musescore, but that is one that I use. So let's go down the line of experience. First, I just have to hit this. So we have Audacity, right, is an option. And I have a MIDI file open now. Audacity has a MIDI layer, but it doesn't really do much. It doesn't have a history and it doesn't have a future as far as I can tell. But you can do a piano roll, but what you would use Audacity for, obviously, is for audio. So once you've exported sounds, say from Musescore, you can do multi-track sequencing of audio in Audacity, and you can even apply live effects in the current renditions of Audacity. So Audacity, extremely powerful as a audio editor, but also as a sequencer. I do a little bit of sequencing, particularly final polish sequencing. When I have multiple tracks that are going to be integrated together, maybe in film score, I will often bring it into Audacity and do a little bit of sequencing in there to kind of finish things up, or do my mastering or some maybe section mixing in Audacity. So it's an honorable mention to bring that up. Audacity gets an enormous amount of use, from me, particularly at the end of a piece. When I've finished mixing it, I will often master and do some final polish and enveloping in Audacity. So that brings me to the next one, which is LMMS, and I have an LMMS project open here. And what I did is I imported MIDI data from Musescore. And you can see here that LMMS does extremely well to import all of the MIDI data. Not only does it have the MIDI data per instrument, and it assigns it by name, instrument name, to track upon import, but it also includes any automation information that comes with the MIDI data, including global automation with tempo and time signature. And that's very powerful for something like LMMS. I mean, LMMS handles MIDI extremely well. The problem, I think, with LMMS has to do with instrument plugins. Now, you can use a wide variety of instrument plugins using a Carla rack or Patchbay as an initial layer, and then inside of that integrated layer, you can open up compatible instrument plugins, and you can even chain in effects directly in there. So that is how I tend to use it. I will use Carla as an integrated layer, and then I will load in my instrument plugins there. It has a very good routing system for the mixer. It's very easy to automate and route the mixing channels in LMMS. The problem here is that the effects graphic user interface, particularly in the mixer, is a very low-level, bare-bones interface. You don't really have the full interface of your plugins, your LV2 plugins or whatever you're able to use there. on Linux. So that is a problem. You really need to know the plugin well, and you need to know what the knobs are going to do, because not everything is always labeled well. But you can automate everything. I mean, you can just automate absolutely everything in LMMS, and it's extremely robust. It doesn't require jack. It just works direct on your ALSA sound layer. You can use jack if you want to, but it does not utilize jack transport. So it's not very good for film scoring because you can't line it up to picture in any way. And certainly it won't do picture. You also can't record audio. You can sequence audio, but you cannot record audio. You would need to record your audio in Audacity and then import your audio and then work from here. If you were doing all electronic music, you can't go wrong with LMMS. If you're doing hybrid music and you're going to use just some layers of orchestral instruments and you have a good sound library, it can do all of the MIDI automation that you need to use it and use it well. So hybrid music is done very well in LMMS. If you're doing full orchestral, you can do it. You can use LMMS. It is possible. I've done it before. But there are, I think, some better options for that, particularly if you need to do scoring to picture for film score. But it handles MIDI extremely well. It just imports all of the data. Everything is there. You're not missing anything. It does that remarkably well. You can also customize the graphic user interface and change colors and organize things. Just the MIDI import is just so powerful on LMMS. So this is a very, very, very good DAW for Linux, apart from the audio deficiencies that it suffers in terms of recording audio, editing audio, but it certainly can sequence audio very well. And then, of course, the deficiencies in the mixer and the graphic user interface. So anyway, that's LMMS. A lot of experience on that one. I used to use this one exclusively, actually. Now that brings us to Qtractor. And I went on for years and years saying that Qtractor, I think, is the best digital audio workstation on Linux. Now, the creator would disagree. The actual developer of this says that Qtractor is a MIDI sequencer, period. That is what it is. It is nothing more than that. And I understand where they're coming from. But honestly, it is a digital audio workstation because you can use audio. You can sequence audio, you can route audio, you can do a little bit of editing on audio, but it is really powerful for MIDI. Now, here's my beef with Qtractor and why I don't use it anymore very much. In spite of the fact that it handles MIDI very well, you can see if I click on a MIDI track, I can go in here and you can open up various control layers and you can change the various CC controls and you have access to all of that data. You can merge the MIDI very well. So you can take MIDI layers and stack them up and then merge them into one and create a new one. The problem with Qtractor is that it does not handle tempo mapping and meter mapping properly. When you import an external file that already has a tempo and meter changes, global changes, it will miss some of that. It just does not. It doesn't handle that with any fidelity. You'll have things dropped out. Some things will be missing. When you try to replace them, it can really muddy up the file. So for that reason alone, I stopped using it because the one we'll talk about last year, which is Ardour, does that very well. It handles MIDI import with high fidelity and actually gives you a lot of options on import. Now, Qtractor gives you options to import all of that information. I'm just saying it doesn't do it well. Even though it gives you the option to import MIDI data in terms of global tempo and time signature, it drops stuff. It just drops things. It does not maintain all of the information in the MIDI file for some reason, even after all this time. So that's that. The routing on this is a little bit more convoluted, but once you understand the insert layer concept, you can do that. And I have a number of tutorials on my old channel where I talk about how to utilize the mixer and work with Qtractor, both inside the program and also using it as a sequencer to export to external playback instruments, and you can certainly do that as well. So it is jack only. Qtractor only works with jack, and you need to have jack enabled. Probably a good point here to stop and talk quickly about Pipewire. I use Pipewire. When I engage in conversations with people about Pipewire, I always have somebody who's behind the curve that will say things like, well, the latency is bad, or it still isn't up to par. You need to update your Pipewire. As of May of this past year, Pipewire is 0 latency on its jack module. So I have no problems with it. I find that I can run multiple different engines, ALSA, jack, pulse audio, everything kind of running together through Pipewire. And most of that can be routed inside of Carla Patchbay, which I'll talk about at the very end of this. So with 0 latency on the jack. So I just need to bring that up. You really want to do Pipewire because you don't have to configure anything. It just works out of the box. You just install it, make sure you have all the modules on there, disable the things that you don't want to have interfering like pulse audio, and everything will work very well. And make sure you have the upstream repositories so that it's updating as they improve it. So anyway, that's Qtractor, a very, very good one. Highly recommend it. Has some limitations, particularly with importing MIDI. But if you're creating a new MIDI file and you're composing direct to DAW, this is very, very solid. And very nice user interface, very customizable, aesthetically pleasing. A lot of good controls. I like a minimalist layout, but you can actually move the controls around and stack up controls any way that you choose. That takes us then to the last one, Ardour, which is the one that I use. Extremely robust as of a few years ago when they did some significant work on the MIDI and the MIDI side of it. And now some of those early issues, particularly with like MIDI on-off events, I mean, very basic stuff, wasn't working right just a few years ago. But they've resolved all of that. And not only have they resolved all of that, but they've added a lot of bells and whistles. So it imports direct with track names. You can customize color. You can organize it, highly customizable sort of scheme to make it aesthetically pleasing. A lot of controls, some good automation in there. Ardour handles automation with drop-down tracks, so it kind of adds another track layer underneath each MIDI layer. If you want to get to the piano roll, you just expand it and the piano roll pops open and then you can access that. But anyway, Ardour is what I use now, mostly because it is extremely robust for MIDI import. It gets all the information, gets all the data. You can mix MIDI files and choose which MIDI data you want to keep and what you want to leave out in the import. You can record audio and edit audio directly inside. It's got a very robust mixing platform. And it also does video directly inside for scoring to pictures. So I do my film scoring sync from Ardour. I map everything out in here to picture, and then I take my map and then I drop it into Musescore, and then I score from there, and then I bring my stuff back over. So, and if I need to add any additional layers, I can do it in Ardour. But anyway, that's the mode that I'm working in right now. So extremely powerful. I highly recommend Ardour, I think, over all of these for the most serious kind of work. But I will say, if you're all electronic, LMMS is still a great, great platform to use if that's what you do. If that's your focus, electronic and hybrid kinds of scoring, this is a great, great solution that works extremely well. In spite of the fact that it hasn't had an update in a long time, it is a very, very stable application. It has a lot of automation control, and with the Beat Baseline editor, you can edit short clips that then are applied without having to copy and paste MIDI. And that's not really a big deal, but some people really like to work that way with patterns. So it's a really good pattern sequencer as well. It got a lot of options and power in LMMS. I really do like it. I wish that it would do jack transport or have video sync. If it did, I would probably do a lot more work in this for film scoring. So anyway, those are the big ones that I use. I know that there's others. You can use Reaper. You can use Traction. There's another one called Muse, which is interesting. It's kind of complicated graphic user interface, not very pretty. There's Rose Garden, same kind of thing, kind of complicated interface, not very pretty and not very robust in terms of its plug-in capability. Yeah, so those are kind of the big ones. I highly recommend these native ones. These three main options: LMMS, Qtractor, and Ardour. And I come down on Ardour these days as the primary DAW that I use in Linux. So anyway, those are my thoughts on the DAWs. The one last thing I want to talk about is Carla. So with all of these, you probably want to use a patch bay of some kind. I tend to use Carla. There's other patch bays or other session managers where you can patch things together. You can link various, various applications. You can see here that we can see Ardour running here, and we have Qtractor over here, and I also have LMMS. All of these things are running on different services. LMMS is running on ALSA, Qtractor and Ardour are running on Jack, and yet I can connect everything all together because I'm running Pipewire. Pipewire. Some of you are going to say, no, because you saw some tutorial months ago about what Pipewire can't do. I'm telling you, update your Pipewire, install it, and make sure you have the most current iteration of it. Because it's really, really solid and robust. I don't think you'll regret it. I think once you're using the most upstream versions of it, you won't go back. That's really the solution for Linux audio, is to convert over to Pipewire and make sure you're up to date on it. But anyway, Carla to kind of patch everything all together. In fact, look what I've got here. Here's Musescore. I've got Musescore, I've got Qtractor, I've got Ardour, I've got LMMS. It's all connected. Right? You can route everything. The only thing you can't route is whatever the application doesn't supply. So right now, Musescore does not supply MIDI output. I wish it did, but it doesn't right now. Otherwise, we would be able to route that and use some capability there. Hopefully, they'll add MIDI transport capability, and then we'll be able to sync some stuff via Carla through Jack in the future. So anyway. Those are my recommendations. Ardour is where I come down. But for me again, this is really where I spend my time. I spend my time in score. I spend my time in notation. Even when I'm doing electronic stuff these days, I spend my time here, and I tend to export MIDI, or I'm finding ways to use electronic sounds just inside of Musescore directly. And if I need to do any post-processing, I'll take it out, kick it into Ardour, and then add some additional effects. If that's desired. So, or in Audacity, I'll render out and then I'll take things into Audacity and apply effects there. So, anyway, that's my workflow, and that's what I use, and those are my opinions on this stuff and why I have my opinions. So, anyway, good luck with that. Happy mixing, happy composing.